to the wood staining and finishing workshop. So we're just going to go over a few of the basic things with wood staining and finishing and all that. Just get some examples and stuff. This is just an example template. So those are the same wood as this. It's the same piece. This is a piece of pine that I used. So I did a grid pattern so I can actually show what each kind of finish looks like together. So this is your control right here. This is what the wood looked like originally. I just sanded it, and that was it. Then I went down with stains. So let me read it out. This is walnut. This is early American. This would be espresso. This is my favorite, Ipswich pine. This is true black, and this is simply white. Now these run a lot when you use them. So that's the only issue, because you're actually really changing the integrity of the color of the wood. Stain doesn't sit on top, it actually seeps into the wood. So that's what makes it work so well. And that's why you don't sand it afterwards, because it can mess up the finish. And so you'll see the run patterns here is a little bit harder to control. Right? So I used those, and then I have different finishes on top of it. So we'll start at the top. This is a water base sealant. Now it goes on white. It looks really weird at first, but it actually clears in about half an hour. Then it takes about 6 hours to completely dry. And so with this, you're not really changing the color of the wood at all. Is the thing, really all you're doing is sealing. It doesn't bring out the grain anymore or anything. It just seals it. You see it's a little darker, but really you cannot tell. Maybe a little bit more detail in this. Then this on the bottom is the complete opposite. This is this true gloss polyurethane. It's an oil base. This is usually used on, really depending, semi-gloss and full gloss are used a lot. I don't have as much experience with water base, but I prefer oil just in general because it finishes a little bit better and brings out the grain of the wood a lot better, especially with stains. So if you look, you can see the difference in the grain, how much you can see here compared to these two. That's why I like it so much. So that's what that is. So this is the full gloss right here. But the only issues you see with even the full gloss, and this is semi-gloss by the way. So it's just a little bit duller, it doesn't shine as much. I'll hand it to you so you can look at it and move it, and you can see how the light reflects off of it and see the differences. With the full gloss and semi-gloss, it turns greenish and yellowish on this white stain, and it actually makes the board just yellow. It's because of the oil inside of it. So these are really better if you're actually changing the wood to a different color or a darker color. Or some wood staining techniques today. Right here we have a nice piece of pine board that I've done some sanding to, and I have actually prepped some lines on. And what we're going to be using is some disposable rags, different stain, a stir stick. Before you apply any of this stuff, you always want to make sure you stir up the stain. There's sediment in the bottom that will change the color and the outcome of these different finishes. After you're done, obviously put it off to the side if you don't need it anymore. There's two different main techniques we can use to apply your stain and urethane. We're going to be using a rag technique today instead of the brush technique. So with the rag technique, after everything's all stirred up, what we'll be doing is you take rags, fold it up, make sure they're clean beforehand, and always wear a glove. It always helps because this stuff will stain your hands and your skin. So what you do is you tilt, take the rag, fold it up, and you're going to put it inside and soak up, not too much, just enough so it's saturated. You're going to get the excess off so it's no longer dripping. Then you're going to slowly wipe it onto the board. Now it's going to look really dark at first. This is a darker stain, but it will come out pretty nice. So what we're going to do is we wipe it in. You don't want to let it sit too long. The longer you let it sit, the darker it'll be. The less time you let it sit, the lighter it'll be. Works out pretty well that way. So you let it sit for a little bit. You take another clean rag and you're going to re-wipe. Now this is going to pull the excess stain off onto the rag, and it's going to lift up some of this darker color. I don't want this to be a super dark finish, so I'm going to keep rubbing. Now be careful at the end. You're going to want to keep applying a clean surface of the rag to the board. When you're doing this, remember also, the harder and more you rub, the more the color will change and darker it will become. So I'm just doing a real mild rub, medium pressure. Not too much, but not too little. I just want to help make sure this stuff works into the wood. The point of the painter's tape on this board as well is I'm going to have some clean lines on here. I want clean edges. I don't want, waves and such on my edges. So stain number 1 is on. You can see a color difference as well. I'm removing this painter's tape so you can see the true difference right up next to it when I'm finished. So now I'll be using a second stain. This first stain was called Walnut. Now I'm going to be using one called Espresso. It should actually come out a little bit darker and richer than this. The walnut looks more like a historical color, like you'd see in places like Old Salem or Gettysburg, areas like that. So I'm going to do the same thing here again. I'm going to make sure it's not dripping. Just a nice saturation on these rags, and I'm going to evenly wipe it onto this board. Now, if you're doing larger areas, you can always add more and wipe again in multiple areas. Try to avoid wiping over the same area multiple times. So this one I'm going to let sit a little bit longer because it is a darker stain, and I want it to spread more evenly, and I actually want this outcut to be a little bit darker. The last one we had maybe 15 seconds sitting on the board. This one I'm going to give about 30 seconds to a minute. Just that way we can have a larger color difference between the ones that are going to be in between these. While I'm waiting for that, I can actually go ahead and pull off the painter's tape, if I can get my hands through it, on the edge of this board. And that way when I hold this up, you'll be able to see the exact color difference, so you don't have the blue interfering. So now I'm going to take my clean rag again, and I'm going to go ahead and start wiping and rubbing. Now this is soaked in a little bit more than the last one has, so it is already a little bit darker. I'm not getting as much coming off of it, but I'm still going to refold and use a clean surface. And I'm actually going to put a little bit more. I'm using more of a medium to heavy pressure this time to spread this and rub it in. Now a good rule of thumb with stain is you need to let it sit anywhere from 3 to 6 hours before applying urethane to the stain, and avoid sanding the board after applying stain to it. It'll change the finish of the board. So now that those are done, and I have my stains on there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the painter's tape off again to show you. Normally I would be doing this to the entire board and having a uniform piece, but my goal here is actually to make an example board with this. That way people can see the different finishes that I'll come with all of this. Yeah. So, with urethane, you also need to stir it, because both of these are semi-gloss and not absolute clear, and they'll definitely have sediment on the bottom of them. The water one actually won't split as much or separate as much as the oil ones will, but it still has some, so you just want to stir it to be safe. Yeah, like I said, it looks like that. Even when you first put it on there, it'll be white. I'm just going to clean it off. And now I can save these to use them as stir sticks. So I'll get it close. You'll dip the brush. You're going to want to wipe half the brush off, get the excess off. You don't want a bunch of it running everywhere. And you're going to follow the grain. Long brush strokes. And it's good practice to try to avoid covering the same exact spot multiple times. You really just want one solid pass. And your first layer is always going to be really thin. And it's going to be the same thing I'm going to do with the water now. I'm going to clean this guy off. Yeah, see how it runs different and everything too? From how the other one did? Just a little bit stuck on there. Get half of it off. Long, thin stroke with the grain. Don't go side to side, just one direction. And the reason I'm doing these different ones on this board is it's a test board. I'm trying to see how it's going to come out with different finishes when I make it a sign for the sign thing we're doing. And right now I'm doing is smoothing it out so it's heavy on one side. And that's that. I'm going to leave it. Don't touch it once I think it looks good. So the side will be dry in about 4 hours, the side about 6 hours. And that's when I'll know what it'll actually look like, finishing me throughout that period.